Hello dear friends and Sadar Pranam to all of you. I am Aabhas. I am an author and also a columnist, and by profession I am an architect. And as I often say, and I have been known to be as one of the ex-communist, ex-Marxist. I have someone can call me an insider of the communist fraternity who is now there to expose the lies of the communists, and I kind of try to expose the maximum of the lies and the corruption whichever what they have brought in front of us Indians. So to start off with, at first when Think India, the forum gave me the chance to choose a topic. So at first I thought that I'd be speaking about how communists betrayed India post-independence. But then I thought that there is something which needs to be spoken about is the great betrayal of 1942. But before I dwell much into it, I will like to give you a brief background of the whole communist fraternity. And so, revolution isn't it the word which which has always filled us with joy and many more positive emotions, which are reinforced with long-lasting goosebumps, isn't it? It has always been an essential part of our life, and none would be one who would have thought not to be a revolutionary, if not a rebel. Yes, rebel and revolutionary are distinct. I would love to talk about it some other day, for even it asks for a long conversation. Now, have you ever noticed it? Try to Google search revolution, and in image category, what you will find is bloody red fist, which would some way or other redirect you to the ideas of communism, isn't it? You may try searching, doing a Google search, it will always lead to the red fist, which will further redirect to the communism. The beautiful human emotion, revolution, seems to have been hijacked by the most dogmatic cult on earth, that is communism. Not to forget, Che has been poster boy of revolution for long. Che featured on t-shirts, coffee mugs, and where not. Young birds have found it intellectual to be inspired from Stalin, Lenin, and Marx, etc. Often lots of discourse are yet set to write of the crime of Naxalism, as they still sing the song of it being revolution. Think multiple times about it. That if social workers like Sudha Bharadwaj gave up the lucrative job only to serve in Naxal affected areas, why she never had any roadmap to solve Naxal problems? Why being advocate she only took up cases of accused Naxals, but never ever tried even exposing Naxal terror? You may call it an ecosystem or whatever you wish to, but the fact remains that the communists have so well hijacked all sectors of narratives that we talk of genocides at the hands of Hitler, but forget that communists had so far killed more than 150 million people across the globe, and we are counting more and more. We missed to speak about mass killings, which seems to be way bigger than that of Hitler. Why? Why is it so? It's just because communists have million coon mouths, since they seem to be bearer of words of the last prophet, Karl Marx. Well, today I'm not going to dwell deep into the philosophy of communism or core factors that led to its origin, but I will certainly look to give you a brief idea about on what principles was communism supposed to work. Modernism was the footing of communism. Modernism was all about the idea form follows function. Essentially, rationalism appeared to be perfect way out in dogmatic church operations through the hand of royals that West was witnessing. People started talking about straight lines. They spoke about idea of drenching away the idea of surrealism or the notion of divinity. Buildings became boxes and steel concrete the materials. Metaphysics was being shown as a facade of dogma, though interestingly, even Karl Marx was a closet religious person. This again is a subject that we would discuss some other time and other day. It's an intense topic, and I do believe that this also needs to be addressed someday about the religious colors of the great communist or the prophet of communists, Karl Marx. I'll just add a bit of what I gained from my own experience and communism. You please don't miss the link that I am an ex-communist. Growing in a family, mix of communists and Sangis, I could see different facades on different days at different times. My childhood gained multi-religious experience, which included visiting church a kilometer east of my house and a mosque a kilometer west from my house. Somehow, the idea of non-compulsive Hindu practices kept making me more attracted towards the other cultures, for mine appeared superstitious and dogmatic. I could never get the logic that why the hell is my grandmother not letting me close to her when I have not taken the bath? Right now, aren't we practicing this whole phenomenon of hygiene and all those things what we call so-called the kind of truth or untouchability in that perspective? But there are a lot of rationales which lie underneath those ideas. I was given the tales of Ram, Krishna, but not the Turk or logic or the rational. I was shown the image of sun god seated on a seven-horse chariot, but not told that the white seven horses represent the white light, that is Vibgyor, or the seven colors of the light. As I grew, bashing own tradition seemed the idea of being fool-doomed. Remember, I spoke of revolution in beginning as I entered college, and as I touched my twenties, the ignorance about own tradition, that is idea being cool too, had brought me closer to communism as I ventured into my architectural studies. The idea of freedom of speech is so strong in architecture school, and if you are ignorant about the past, trust me, you are going to be a communist for sure. My interest in literature pushed me to read Marx and Stalin. I was on my way to Inqilab. Lots of things happened in architecture school and beyond. Anti-corruption movement played a crucial role in my life. It was on and on. But just an incident of visiting the Ajanta caves for a study trip was a game changer of my life. Perhaps the Ajanta caves and the great Kailasha temple were the gurus I was long awaited to meet. I have spoken extensively about my story of transformation in my current book, or the latest book rather, Modi Again, an ex-communist manifesto. It has been a fabulous journey for me to come back to the home where I and all of us are supposed to belong to. The journey has taught me various things I have learned following. If terrorism has to have a religion or cult, it is communism. Communists, though, are supposed to be modernists, but are the most dogmatic living cult. They have been blindly following their prophet Karl Marx without experimentation, which is the base of rationalism. While I gave the topic to Think India Forum, I thought of talking about what havoc communists created post-independence. But then I thought of talking about the big 1942 betrayal too, apart from covering the 2 decades before and after independence. The 1942 betrayal of communists is very important to know because the current descendants of cult have sold the propaganda to make royal Deshbhakt appear as traitors, though the story is otherwise. The secret alliance between Communist Party of India and British government was first exposed fabulously by Arun Shourie in his article The Great Betrayal, which followed with much details in his book The Only Fatherland. I began to dig further, and a lot of things appeared supported by the documents. They were from the National Archives. The 22nd day of the 6th month of 1941, the Communist Party of India was working for Indian interests against British imperialists. They fought against the British as the fatherland of Indian Communist Soviet Union, which was having a secret pact with the fascist Hitler. Interesting, isn't it, that today the communist leaders keep blaming the government of India to be Nazi and fascist. The pact, famously known as Stalin-Hitler Pact, was a secret plan to invade and then take several countries' share, including Poland. And hence USSR and CPI were against Britain and Indian British government. They had not much to do with India. But something strange happened. Operation Barbarossa changed the order of communists globally. Nazi Hitler attacked the fascist Stalin, and Stalin decided to side with the Britain to gain substantial support. The Communist International, which controlled the communist parties around the world, gave orders to change the track completely, and the Communist Party of India followed the footsteps. Of course, they were supposed to follow their father, isn't it? The British India Office sent a secret letter on the date of the 10th day of 1942 to all Indian provincial governments to consider for a new treatment towards the individuals or groups who had opposed the war effort, enclosed with a detailed memorandum. Now let's talk a bit about the Crips Mission. It has a lot to do with the thing. The Crips Mission was an unsuccessful attempt in the last week of March of 1942 by the British government to ensure complete Indian cooperation and support for their efforts in the World War II. A mission was headed by a veteran minister, Sir Stafford Cripps, and that's why known as the Crips Mission. And he successfully established links with the then General Secretary of CPI, Mr. P.C. Joshi. The Secretary of Crips requested British government to suspend Mr. P.C. Joshi's arrest warrant for an interview with Cripps in Delhi on April 6, 1942. The very next morning, the arrest warrant was suspended for 10 days so that Mr. Joshi could travel to Delhi to make the pact. Let's look for the initial connection. P.C. Joshi and Cripps held secret talks and agreed for more talks with the secret cooperation. P.C. Joshi was able to evolve good relationships with Home Member Sir Reginald Maxwell. On April 21st, 1942, Additional Secretary of the Government of India, Richard Tottenham, sent communication to all provincial governments to consider releasing communists with no criminal backgrounds who were detained under the Rule 26. I believe that after the talk of the day of the lecture, I'll be posting the documents as well for all people's reference so that you can relate to whatever I am speaking today. The Intelligence Bureau records of April 27, 1942 states to withdraw the arrest warrants against P.C. Joshi if he is ready, on the ground that if he is ready to play the game. The game was definitely the secret pact. It also suggested reinsuring the warrant in case he is not ready for it. It was definitely the alliance that they were talking about. The warrant against Joshi was withdrawn on the April 28 of 1942 with a clear instruction to reissue it at a later date, but not to do so without giving P.C. Joshi a month's notice of their intention. Arrest warrant of P.C. Joshi dated March 6, 1940 stood cancelled. Then Richard Tottenham sent a secret communication to all provincial governments, which was dated April 30th, 1942. This very clearly points out that British made a separate plan with CPI. The communication said, "We have reason to believe Joshi may now be willing to lend unconditional support to war effort." It also gave instruction to reissue the warrant after allowing P.C. Joshi a sufficient notice. If Joshi is again not willing to play the game. Bengal government cancelled PC Joshi's arrest warrant, which they had issued. The relationship between CPI and the British India government became very effective, and the British became completely lenient towards them. What followed next is even more interesting. On June 8th of 1942, government sent a four-page communication to all provincial governments to release communist leaders in jail, naming some of the important leaders. It was the new tactical line of the British. As per the secret plan, British legalized CPI, which was not earlier, and supported them for the new propaganda war. The closed-door relationship between both was a win-win situation for both the parties, that is the British and the Communists. The CPI started getting special discounts as well as the subsidies from the government for the new tactical line. Parties started sending requests for people and electricity quota to the government. All this, what I am talking about, comes from the National Archives of India. All the documents are available right now. In party letters to British, CPI clearly claimed to be the only party which has patriotic policy for national defense and national unity. This was something very interesting. Communist Party's new tactical line and new propaganda began to function flawlessly. They attacked national organizations for the stand against the unity and the security of India. Not to forget that they organized public speeches and attacked Subhash Chandra Bose big time. The traitors of the day did not miss to even criticize British policies that suited the public welfare. The party frequently organized pro-British propaganda like National Unity Week, while others strived for independence. The party as in the CPI, was too keen to organize public propaganda programs for the Hindu-Muslim unity as part of its tactical line to support the British. This was a similar line that British were following for long, just to show the sense of unity, but there was something bigger at the hand. And the documents even support the claim that the communists were the first people to support division of India as Muslim Pakistan. Interesting. CPI blamed all nationalist organizations and the people as the fifth column. I am sure that everyone understands what fifth column is. Fifth column are the people who are against the national interest or the enemies of the state. It is clearly visible in all the letters to British, and we can find remarks by British in that CPI. That CPI seems to be referring everyone else as fifth column. But the reality is CPI was actually doing the real job of the fifth column in perspective of India. By then, the government of the day had even received clearance for the lenient attitude towards CPI from Britain's war cabinet. A memorandum was passed out. CPI had more plans and demands, and so they started contacting British government for more support and wanted many more party members to be released, which government of India refused to accept. They had troubles with the local government. So Joshi sent a memorandum consisting of around 130 pages to Sir Reginald Maxwell with a cover letter. It was drafted province-wise and it listed out the party members to be released and the propaganda programs they were going to conduct and have conducted for the British. PC Joshi included a 9-page summary too inside, which included the plan of action in the CPI for the support to the British government. There is a separate heading for Kerala and subheading for Kochi and Travancore in the memorandum. We can find names of big communist leaders such as C. Achyuta Menon, A.K. Gopalan and E.K. Nayanar in it. The British accepted CPI claims and demands, but there were certain reservations. So now let's get to the public response, how the public and the media of the time was responding and what was actually happening for how people were perceiving the great plan of CPI as. The public were now getting quite suspicious about CPI and their stance. So when Gandhiji sent Joshi a letter and questioned the party's stand, Interestingly, Joshi replied, but without revealing any party secrets for obvious reasons. Some newspaper stories came out blaming CPI's stand and stating that party is isolated from the nationalists big time. It was difficult for some of the fractions of the party to digest the new policy, and some of them complained that it is not clear. PC Joshi himself met them to explain about the new party stand, and gradually it was accepted and swallowed completely by CPI. Uh, One very interesting aspect of all this thing is the Caillou case. Again, it is again a a lot of more details are related to the case, but I will give you a brief that how it really reflects of the communist intention against India during the freedom movement, and especially with regards to this 1942 Great Conspiracy or the Secret Pact. The court had issued death penalty to the five Caillou case accused comrades. They were involved in movement against the British government when CPI line was anti-British. But CPI then changed side when five of them got death penalty. One could escape from the death penalty as the person was minor. CPI Secretary PC Joshi interestingly goes on to visit the remaining four on the last evening and believed to hit the truth that the party had then become pro-British. So till the time those four were being going to get the death penalty, Joshi didn't make them clear that CPI was now a pro-British organization. They could have avoided it all of it, but if the incident had occurred some months after. Now, the cooperation was still continuing. The British government observed that CPI was losing the public support. In reality, CPI was between Indian interest and the USSR. They were lying somewhere between the Indian interest and the USSR interest. They knew that they can't make pro-British stand clear to the public. They asked the government to release the jailed Congress leaders during the Quit India movement, and the British government asked Joshi for clarification. One may read it in Reginald Maxwell's reply letter to the PC Joshi for his memorandum. You will find a lot of things. During the meeting with British officer in 1946, even I am mentioning Dr. Ambedkar revealed that he had information that the Communist Party did accepted money and arms from the British military and fought for them in Burma. So even Ambedkar was very clear that the communists are pro-British and they are not at all pro-India. So nowadays it's become fashion or rather the vogue for the communists to make Dr. Ambedkar as their icon. But trust me, Dr. Ambedkar considered the communists to be his big time enemies. So that was a bit of the details about the big betrayal of the communists in 1942. Now, I would like to take you a bit through what was CPI's stand around the 1962 Indo-Sino War. Now, today you may find all the communist leaders they just go on to bash every nationalist organization that you didn't fight for India and not many things happened. But if you look down the history lane and if you look for the documents, the primary sources, it is so interesting that the communists were standing with the Chinese. They will not talk about RSS being called for the Republic Day parade after the Indo-Sino War for the support and the cooperation, but they actually sided with the Chinese. Let me pull out first. I went through a CIA dossier. It is a 185-page CIA dossier, which is now available online, and anyone can go through it. And it reveals a lot of things about how CPI was actually betraying India big time. Let me first put out a few bullet points for you. Then I will go into the details which were let down into the CIA dossier. So the bullet point A. H.K. Surjit was influenced by Russia to set up an underground organization. CPI did proceed to recruit a secret organization within the Indian Army. Isn't it interesting? Russia insisted that the CPI must develop a standby apparatus capable of armed resistance while intensifying penetration of Indian military forces. With the People Liberation Army now present along the Indian border, the Indian party had a channel of support for the armed operations and the potential liberator in the event of mass uprising on the 13th of September 1959. Four powerful radio sets had been installed in the office of China Review in Calcutta to listen to the broadcast from Peking. Chinese financial subsidies to sections of the CPI, particularly the left faction, strongholds in West Bengal, particularly strongholds in the West Bengal. A foreign supply base was now available for the underground organization with the Chinese occupation of Tibet and other frontier areas. Later asking for collaboration in Indian underground organization work aimed at an eventual revolution because China has a border with the India and can provide arms and supplies is also found. Also not to miss Jaipal Singh, the head of the illegal organization within the Indian army, decided to reactivate his organization in May 1961, following the hard-left faction gaining control of the party. So these are few of the bullet points pulled out from the CIA dossier. So now I will further go into the details on to explain that how CPI was actually playing against the profit of India during in and around the Indo-Sino War, and they always showed their allegiance either to Russia or China. They had the confrontation, but it was on the base that whether they are going to support the China or whether they are going to support Russia. So now let me take you more through the details of the dossier. It's completely interesting. So let me start with the great revelation of the dossier. Now we must note that despite the border dispute with China, Nehru was kind of naive in his approach to deal with the Chinese. Nehru always believed that China's communist leaders were amenable to the gentlemanly persuasion. Nehru's strategy was defensive, and he believed that strengthening Indian economy to resist a Chinese military attack was adequate and sufficient enough. China's short-term policy was not to alert Nehru on the wide gap between Chinese and the Indian claims on border, and hence they lied about the Chinese maps continuously. Chinese leaders recognized that the India, neither by temperament nor by capability, was a military threat. They always considered India to be a very soft nation to deal with. China's strategy was to use diplomatic channels to cut out Indian press, public, and even the parliament. It was a 5-year masterpiece in Nehru. It played on Nehru's Asian anti-imperialistic mental attitude, his attitude and temperament to compromise the sincerity for the peace with China. What China conceded with the left hand, it retrieved with the right hand. China was always kind of betraying us, or rather was playing the kind of game which is somehow still playing in the COVID case too. But back then also we didn't understand. So now let me take you further into it. Had it not been Nehru, but a more military-minded man, or rather a man who would be more interested into protecting nation on the military lines, and had been the Prime Minister in October 1959, a priority program to prepare India to eventually fight would have been started, but it didn't begin by then. Now, in the July of 1957, through reliable sources, it is learned that EMS Nambudripad was asked by the Soviets to forward the full report to Moscow of the methods to use to attain the power via elections. I am talking about the 1957 elections of Kerala. This is the time from when communists from the Russia and China started taking hold of the Indian politics holistically. So the other juicy details implicate that Hari Kishan Singh Surjit and others were working on with the Soviet communists to set up an underground party. In February 1958, an official of the Soviet embassy contacted CBI leaders to renew the request to set up an underground organization. While Ajay Ghosh had refused, H.K. Surjit and many others privately decided that Ghosh was taking up a complacent line and decided to reach out to the CPSU outside the party channels. Here is where things were getting even more murkier. The CPI did proceed to recruit a secret organization within the Indian Army. Subsequent events saw the beginning of the tilt of the hard left fraction of CPI towards China. Yes, CPI did have two fractions. One was a very hard left and one you can call it to be the left fraction. The dossier has quoted a lot of communist leaders, including Baswana Punaiya, a CPI leader. The real source of inspiration of the CPI should be Communist China, and I'm quoting the leader. The real source of inspiration for CPI should be Communist China, and he planned to talk to the Chinese leaders as how a disciple talks to his teacher. So the great CPI leader was looking at China as his guru during that period. Some of more earlier details on how China and Russia influenced the CPI setup is really even more interesting. In February of 1959, Ajay Ghosh, in his report to the Central Executive Committee, states that the China-Russia insisted that CPI must develop a standby apparatus capable of armed resistance while intensifying the penetration of the Indian military forces. After the Nehru government dismissed the Kerala Communist government on the July of 31st, 1959, there was further movement within the party to revive the illegal activities. From August 6 to 8, 1959, hard leftists urged a revival of CPI illegal apparatus to be done from the party's secretariat. Now things even get more uglier. The CPI was further supporting the China during the Tibetan invasion. In April 1959, Rana met the Chinese ambassador, during which he clearly offered CPI support to China on the Tibet and advised China to concentrate its attack on the rightist anti-Chinese Indian leaders. Further, in August, in a letter to the Chinese Communist Party, drafted by Ajay Ghosh and Ranadev, the CPI urged the Chinese to single out particularly the Praja Socialist Party and the Jan Sangh for attack as suggested in the April meeting with the ambassador. There are even more evidences of sedition and treasonous role played by the hard left of the CPI. In September, Central Executive Committee met Ajay Ghosh and argued against the tendency to welcome Chinese military presence on the Indian borders to justify a new militant line for the CPI. This was rejected by the hard left, who argued that with the PLA now present among the Indian border, the Indian party had a channel of support for the armed operations and the potential liberator in the event of mass uprisings. The CIA reports that this line was repeated multiple times. It was first reported on the September 13, 1959 by Baswa Punaiya, Ranadev, Jaipal and the Jaipal Singh, the head of the secret legal apparatus. However, dossier even gets interesting as it moves into the 1960s and closer to the formal split in the party. Yes, the party has split, and it was all because, as I stated, because of a party kind of trying to lean towards India and some other going to lean against India. In 1960, the West Bengal fraction of the Communist Party passed a resolution criticizing the conduct of the Soviet Communist Party, and they further go on to support the Chinese Communist Party. The CIA calls it definitely the only such resolution to have ever been passed by any communist party in the whole world. It had never happened earlier. The year 1960 ended with this fraction of the CPI continuing to support the Chinese party and receive guidance from it. Ajay Ghosh also reported to the Central Executive that during the Peking visit, Mao had revealed that China wished to exercise more control on the communist parties in Asia. The most concentrated of this communist activities were to be in West Bengal. Evidence of Chinese influence in the growth of the Communist Party in West Bengal is clearly seen with time. A new Chinese Party Council in Calcutta in September 1960 held several meetings with members of West Bengal Party. Four powerful radio sets had been installed in the office of a China Review in Calcutta to listen to the broadcast from Peking. Handouts were given based on these broadcasts for propaganda work. So you see that how kind of our CPI, China, Communist Party of India, working in tandem with the China to, strengthen their stand to go more and more anti-India. The CIA also reports of indications from 1959 of the Chinese financial subsidies to the section of CPI, particularly to the left fraction strongholds in West Bengal. Vaswanta Punaiya also reports to two CPI leaders on that a foreign supply base was now available for the underground organizations with Chinese occupation of Tibet and other frontier areas. In September 1960, the first evidence of a vertical split in the CPI became evident, with a hard-left fraction comprising of Jyoti Basu, Harikishan Singh Surjit, Vaswanta Punaiya, and NRDF supporting the Chinese position on the Indo-Sino border dispute. Early in August, further dirty evidence of the hard left seeking Chinese support comes in a written letter, asking for a collaboration in Indian underground organization work aimed at an eventual revolution because China has a border with India and can provide arms and supplies. There are even actually a lot of evidence of anti-national stance by Jyoti Basu, led West Bengal fraction. So if I sum it all across, right from, so there are even a lot more interesting revelations which comes to the CIA dossier of the 185 page CIA dossier. It really stripped down Communist Party completely. That how they were working against the Indian interest, how they were always trying to support the Chinese propaganda, how they even went against India in the Indo-Sino War, the 1962 Indo-Sino War. And I also explained about the kind of betrayal they gave us in 1942 through the secret pact with the British, just because their master, the master Russia, had changed their stand. So I think that I was given actually 35 to 40 minutes to speak and on the subject, and there's a lot more to speak. As far as the betrayal of the communists are concerned, considered I can go on to speaking. And right now also I'm working extensively upon how Communist Party in China is creating lot of nuisances to spread the COVID virus, which I should feel we shouldn't be so ashamed to call the Chinese virus. So somehow the communists have always carried this trait of being anti-humanity, whether it comes to 150 million plus people, the death of the 150 million plus people, or it's a Naxal movement, or so on and on. So I will leave the place for now. If there are questions, I'm ready to take them up. Thank you. So So I see a question been put out in the comment that how did communists lay down a sinister design of ridiculing the pride of being Bharatiya? So I will answer it quite briefly. I will not go much into detail of it because two great examples I have already laid down that how they have always shown their allegiance towards either Russia or rather USSR, which it was in the past, or China. And somehow the idea of the communist movement starts with the concept of modernism, as I explained. It was more about going against the surrealistic idea. It was more about being rational. It was more about being scientific. It was more about bringing more and more logical end to the whole discourse. So if you look at the communist movement very clearly, it was very much supported by the modernists. And as they were the rational people, they said that, there is no place for the divinity, there is no place for something called surrealism. They were trying to eat up away all the emotional factor which makes a human in us. So when Karl Marx said that religion is the opium of the oppressed, so he meant a lot of things by then because the situation in West also was somehow very different. The churches of the West were being controlled by the royal families, especially in the Germany. And he was seeing that yes, there was some kind of operation. So when he said this, he was meaning to say with certain context. He has not seen more of India. At the same time, once we come to the Indian foreground, how India works at, if I further going to dig into the past, India has always been welcoming for all the religions. It has been welcoming for all the different faiths. So why the different religions were being massacred, being killed in the other countries? Like if we say, for example, take the massacre of the Persians. So the Persians were given the refuge in the land of Bharat. They came to India in the 8th century, and the King Yadav accepted them very graciously. So the leader of the Persian said that we don't want non-Iranians to come around in a certain radius where the holy fire is being lit. So the whole idea of being Bharatiya or the Hindu or the Hindutva idea at that time was about inclusiveness. We were very open to include any faith in our whole system. Had it been a communist setup, which is outrightly rejecting any idea of any kind of divinity, when I say divinity, the way to look at the God, the way to worship, the way to look at some external force which is trying to bind us all together. If you remove this communist fraction, there are a whole lot of people who see that there's certain section of there is certain force which is running the whole of the world. So had it been communist, somehow we won't have been able to even include the other faiths. We would have ridiculed them. We would have thrown them out. We won't have included even Islam. We won't have included the Christians. We won't have included the Jews. So, and with the time, when it further flourished in the Indian context in the modern time, they tried to perceive the whole idea of communism from the Western context. They saw that what the great prophet Karl Marx had said. But somehow it was not going to work out in the India because India is all about color. India is all about multicultural. India is all about pluralism. India is all about distinctions. And India is all about the acceptance. So somehow it could never set well in the Indian context because they couldn't understand that what Indian people are all about. And also what went on further is that because of all the softest of the faith, Hinduism. I somehow despise of calling this word Hinduism, but this Hindu plus ism. That is how it comes out to be. It was only coined in the 19th century, though it is actually the Sanatana Dharma. So it was kind of very inclusive. It was trying to include everyone, and it was very soft at its ends. So somehow communists saw that it is the most easiest way to bring down the Sanatan practices because the people are quite docile. They are not gonna be somehow that is what our culture is about. We can't help it. But with the time, the sense of modernism which further which comes into the youth. the sense of modernism, when you try to be more scientific, more rational, and when, like I always said, that I never got the logical answers for why I am stepping into the puja room without my sleepers, why I am not allowed to touch my grandmother or go near to the grandmother when she is going to perform puja and I am not taken bath. So somehow the scientific rationales were not being given to us. So that kind of idea, in a way, deviated a lot of people away from the Sanatan Dharma, or rather, what you can say, the Bharatiya practices. So the time has come when we need to bring back the rationals, when we need to bring back the tark, the logic, the greatness of the civilization through the science, whether it is through the explanation that how calculus comes through Indian civilization, whether it is about how the mathematics and the physics was completely developing in India, whether it's about explaining that when sun god sits on the seven horses, it's about the white light, the seven colors. So we need to get back to that. And once we get back to that, the communists somehow, the most sinister of the cult, what I would say, will not be able to break the Indic civilization or the Bharatiya civilization in any way. We need to be more tactic, more logical, more substantial. We need to fight them with their own weapon. So I see the next question coming, that what do you think about the Islamist and the Communist alliance? So as I say that communists are the most they are like a fluctuating bulb. They keep on they are the kind of people who don't have alliance even with if I be very clear, they don't have any alliance with the Islamists too. They don't have any alliance with the Christians. They don't have any alliance the Hindu. It's all about the kind of profit model what they want to set up. So, like how we see what the Chinese did to the Muslims and Chinese government did to the Muslims, explains a very different story. So that somehow, yesterday I wrote on the Twitter also that the moment I see that I think of a religion of terrorism, the only name which comes to my mind is the communist. They are the ones who have tried to misconstruct all of our ideas. Somehow we have to take this back to that when the Islamic invasions were happening, they spoiled our culture to a great extent. It was havoc. A lot of multiple conversions happened. Multiple trails were taken away. It was a complete disaster for India. It plundered our GDP to a great extent. Like it was during the Akbar's reign when, for the first time, our GDP went below that of China. For the first time, it went below China in the reign of the great Akbar the Great. So they ruined. So they were trying to ruin our civilization. They were trying to ruin our tradition. So somehow communists found that if you add more fire to the radical practices of the Islam or the Islamists, they somehow will be able to bring pull down the whole Bharatiya discourse, or the only discourse which can defeat the communism very strongly. So somehow this pact will keep on going on and on unless we really come out against the communists very strongly. But logic, substance, we need to enrich our literature, we need to enrich our a lot of resources, a lot of things needs to be done. There is a long way ahead. Then I see a question that basically whom you can call a communist. So this is a very dicey question, I must say, because I say that communism is a cult of which works on the principle of the last prophet, and I call Karl Marx as the last prophet. So somehow we can't find a true communist because the principles on which the communism is supposed to work is on the socialism. The principle on which it's supposed to work is on the compassion with the people. It is mentioning supposed to work. It is supposed to work on the idea of modernity. And now I must quote one thing, that a person who is too modern and who is too rational, who is too tarkic, who is too logical, will find that like I'll take my own example, that I was suffering through the syndrome of communism. I was also following the great prophet, the Karl Marx. But when I got exposed to the great Ajanta caves and the great Kailasha temple, something went there. Something triggered me, and the rational and the logic of me. Again, I tell you, the rational and the logic is the core of communism. So the rational and logic of me somehow pulled me to the Hindu faith very much, or the Indian culture, or the Sanatan culture very strongly. Any person who is Tarkic cannot ever defy the greatness of the Bharatiya civilization. So any person who claims to be a communist, and if he's actually a rational, who is Tarkic, who is logical, who believes in the bedrock on which the movement is supposed to work, can't deny the greatness of the Indic civilization. So I think it answers that question too. So yeah, I see two, three questions more popping in. One is, can a religious person be a communist? So this is a very interesting question. For that, I will like to deviate a bit. There are two aspects. The two different aspects are the dharma and the religion. Religion or dharma is not synonymous to religion. I will be very clear about it. And while dharma is nothing but the force by which you hold the reed, the dharma comes from the root word dri, which is means to hold. And the idea of holding the reed means the cosmic laws, like the flowing of the water. The flow of water always will flow downwards. It's a natural law, like it's a Sanatan law. So like that, the when you follow the reed, and when you are holding the reed together, you are following the Sanatan Dharma, which is a very natural Dharma which will never change and it will always remain there forever. As far as religion is considered, religion is something which is very different. It comes with a doctrine or a book. It is always supported. It's an institution for me. And any institution, I do believe, can side with the communist and vice versa. Because again, if you look at the way, I always call communists as a cult. The way the communists work, they also have a doctrine. They also work on a certain principle of a book, where the Karl Marx is the prophet. So I don't see them different from anyone who is dwelling into the religion. So, but only the difference being that perhaps the communists have the maximum blood at their hand. They have killed 150 million plus people. So somehow the religion Somehow a person who is into the religion, I will beg to differ from Dharma, can become a communist, but it won't be the other way around. You can become a socialist, but becoming a socialist and communist is somewhat very different. It's again a very different subject to speak about the socialist and the communist, how they are different. They are not same. I like to state. Now I see a question popping in where Mr. Kabir is that do you consider CIA dossier as a gospel of truth? So this is a very interesting question, but how it works, sir, is that when in the time in the time of now when it's all about the narratives which are given to you, whether it was a narrative that once upon a time it was said that in 1500 BC, Aryans came and they destroyed the Indus Valley civilization, and so-called the real people of India were thrown away towards the south, and many were butchered and killed. And later, it became the migration theory. So by then also, even the nationalistic people were reading that text because that was the narration of that time. It was supported with certain documents, of course, always the first document, but it was supported by certain documents. All the narration requires certain amount of source. But as far as the CIA dossier is considered, CIA dossier even goes on to CIA dossier is right now a document which has not been bunkered by any other communist authority too. Problem lies on our side that we have not asked enough questions to the communists. We have stopped asking them questions. Neither we have asked them about the great betrayal of 1942. It's not asked. So the documents of 1942 are also available in the National Archives. We should ask. So as and coming back to the CIA dossier even further goes on to quote the letters. So there is a cross-linking of references. So as of now, because this piece of evidence stands undisputed, no one has ever come. I don't think that communists will leave it go if it is a false thing. They when they can go on to tell so much lies about the Ram temple, what happened? There was a series of lies which were spoken in the Allahabad court. Then would they have left the CIA dossier? I don't think so. As far as I understand, communists they won't leave it if it is the untrue one. So it's not the gospel truth, but it's the truth for me right now. So I like to take up more questions if there are any two, three, or else I'll just leave for now. Oh, I see one more question by Mr. Kapi. What is your take about the CPI masses? So, as I said, that somehow, after I have looked into all the works of the communist work, uh, whatever I have read so far in my short span of life, and whatever kind of propaganda I see coming from there, and somehow none of this stand has convinced me, an ex-communist, that they are standing for the nation or even the humanity. So I don't have any different opinion about CPIM even, and they are just they are just as good as just another communist. So I think that if India has to, I would like to leave the whole this forum on this note that I'm very staunch and very clear about it. But somehow, what the opposition somehow what the position is missing is missing on the line that as far as the current government party is considered, it is working completely on the national interest. Our oppositions, or especially I will say the communists, are too much interested in the anti-national narrative. So, if at all anyone wants to progress or grow further in India and for the goodness of India, an opposition needs to come with a national interest, which talks about the nationalistic interest. If and even if a communist party wants to take a stand, they need to become the communists like those of China and those of America too, who stand for the country, whatever the matter may be. So I think that the answer. So thank you. It was really nice putting across my words, and thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. I look forward again to speak more about beyond the Indo-Sino War, even more into detail into it. Thank you. It was nice interacting. Thanks a lot.